What's going on, good people? Welcome to the Poor Vera podcast. I am extremely excited about this show we have with my good friend, Danny Sillman, CEO of Relevant Sports. On this episode of the Poor Vera podcast, we speak about how he started a athlete family office out of his dorm room at the University of Michigan his freshman year in college. We speak about how he's managed Draymond Green's business. We speak about his new role at CEO of Relevant Sports. And we speak about his tactic of cold calling people in an effort to advance his career as a young entrepreneur. Hope you enjoy this show. Very excited about the show today, as I have a very good friend of mine who needs no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. Actually, you have a new title. It's like you're 30 under 30, right? You were 30 under 30.
I got that last year.
30 under 30.
I'll take that.
CEO of Relevant Sports, Danny Sillman. Danny, what's up, man? Welcome to the show.
Appreciate it. I'm great.
I'm excited to have you on the show today. I normally, my producer normally jokes because I don't really prepare a ton. I didn't prepare anything. I literally don't have a question. I don't even have a piece of paper. I don't have anything because we have such a relationship. So my goal for every interview is that it's conversational. We have no choice but for this to be conversational.
Good. Well, I see a good bottle of Sassicaia.
Yes, 100%.
And I got Europe on my mind, so
yes. So
I feel good.
Just so our listeners and viewers know, this show is the only thing standing between Danny and a flight to Europe, which is a business trip then followed by a vacation.
Exactly.
So we're the only thing standing between you. So I wanna start a little bit at the beginning, right? I wanna go back to your days at University of Michigan, and we can spend the whole show there. But specifically one piece, right? A good friend of yours, one of your best friends, BG,
yep.
Brandon Graham, right? He decides to go turn pro, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. He has financial advisors and people coming at him, right? As yep. all high level draft picks do. And does he come to you for advice and helping him select a financial advisor, or does he come to you and say, hey, can you help me figure this whole thing out? How's that work?
So it actually started when I was a freshman, end of my freshman year. Brandon's finishing his sophomore year at Michigan at this point. He's a highly touted prospect, and he's got agents, he's got financial advisors, he's got all sorts of people, card dealers. You name it, jewelers,
yeah, I'm sure.
Showing up outside the practice facility.
You don't got to pay for this right now. You don't got to pay. Just take it.
We'll give it to you.
Yes.
We'll give it to you.
Yes.
You know that whole pitch. Mm-hmm. We'll give it to you. You should have it. You should hold it for us. That was the best line. Please hold this for me.
Mm-hmm.
So he had all these types of people waiting outside tunnels, waiting outside practice facilities, calling his mom and dad, calling cousins, trying to figure out how to get to him. And we had built a very close relationship. This guy was coming to Passover Seder with me, with my family. My grandma is on an oxygen tank still watching Eagles, and she's watched Eagles the last 10 years.
I love it.
So we had built a great relationship, and he says, will you help me through the process of evaluating the team that I need at the professional level, whether it's an agent or a financial advisor or whatever else. And at first I said, yeah, I'm happy to as a friend.
And you're a freshman.
Yeah, I'm the end of my freshman year at Michigan.
Jesus. How old are you? 18, 19?
18, 19 years old.
Jesus. Okay.
So actually that summer I went to London. I went to London School of Economics. I'm living overseas. I had some extra time. I'm having a good time. I'm in college. It's like going abroad.
You're 18, 19 years old, yeah.
Exactly. And I started to listen to what he was saying, and what I realized was all these financial advisors were pitching to manage Brandon's investments. Mm-hmm. Brandon has no money to invest. And he starts getting pitched by agents, and he had asked for advice or feedback on who were the best agents. And we started as early as, what does an agent even do?
Right, I'm sure.
What is an agent? And so I actually took myself through the education process because I had no clue what an agent did, what a financial advisor would do for an athlete. But I understood that a financial advisor manages investments. And what I learned was an agent manages a contract process. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, for an NFL player, especially a defensive end like Brandon, you do a contract, especially off a rookie deal, which he'd ultimately have. and you don't really need your agent on a day-to-day basis unless you have an injury or you need to be traded or you're a marginal player and you need looks to go get into a workout. So ultimately, what would happen in terms of protecting Brandon throughout his career, in terms of who's going to help him set a budget, who's going to help him get the proper insurance, who's going to make sure when he gets married, ultimately he has an estate plan to protect his future family, who's going to handle his tax planning, who's going to handle all of the investments ultimately when they do come from an independent perspective, not somebody who's getting paid based on how he's investing. So I started looking at all these
things. And even
things.
before you get to that point, Danny, it's like, who's going to let him know he even needs to know that shit, right? It's like, it's one thing to know you need to find the best financial guy, you need to find the best agent, you need to find the best, like, family office. It's like most 19-year-old kids don't even know they need that shit.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean,
Like,
we were starting as simple as, what does an agent even do?
Well, I'm sure.
And by the way the NCAA works, you're not allowed to talk to agents really until you're a junior. I don't know if the rules have changed at this point, 10 years later.
You can't talk to them till you declare for the draft.
Exactly. Yeah. So at this point, the agents are contacting you somewhat illegally.
Jesus.
And the good agents actually aren't. So you're getting all the bullshit, actually. Yeah. Because you're getting the shitty agents who really don't care about the rules, and they're just trying to win at all costs.
So Brandon Graham comes to you and says, hey, help me figure this shit out. What's the first thing you do?
So I start researching, and actually at this point, this has wavered all the way into the summer of the following year. So we've gone through a year of me, Brandon, and my dad riffing. So actually, what is the first thing I do? I go to my dad and say, let's help Brandon through the process of finding out what an agent does, making sure he gets the right agent, and then ultimately put the right financial team in place. And so we go through that education process. Ultimately, I go take a finance private equity job the following summer, which is after my sophomore year. Brandon is now finishing his junior year at this point, and by the way, the best defensive player other than Lamar Woodley that Michigan's had probably in a couple of decades, if not one of the best players ever, and is ultimately on his way to be one of the only two-time captains of the school.
And now everyone's after him.
Everyone's after him. And they're saying at this point he could be second-round pick, something like that, if he comes out. So now Brandon's very serious about putting the right team in place, and he didn't even think about the draft. He didn't even really apply for his draft grade. At this point, the university had told him you might be a second-round pick, something of that nature, but he says, I'm coming back. So when he does that, I spend the next summer in what I'm supposed to be doing a private equity job, actually interviewing agents before, during, and after work on his behalf. So I'm meeting Joel Siegel, Drew Rosenhaus, Priority Sports, Rick Smith, what is David Dunn's firm? I forget the name of his firm. I'm interviewing all the top agents that I had Googled and tried to find who are the best NFL agents.
Now, let me ask you this. I think because at this point, are you 20 yet when you're doing this?
Maybe just 20.
Right, 20?
Yeah.
Because you're a kid, right? Most kids at 20 are thinking to themselves, well, how's this benefit me, right?
Yep.
Hey, maybe I'll go and be an agent, right? Yep. You never thought like, hey, I want to go be an agent or I want to go actually do this shit. And you weren't making a penny, it's my understanding, throughout any of this process, right? It was just, I want to help my friend.
Exactly. It was always about helping Brandon. In fact, I think the more research I did and the more I understood what an agent actually did, for me, that wasn't what I had an interest to do.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of respect for the top agents and what they had accomplished and what they were doing. But the more I learned, the less I had an interest. In fact, I realized that, being a lawyer and going through that process was just not of interest to me. And that's what I really felt like, at least from my education, that you really needed to do to be an agent. It wasn't the body of work I wanted to be in. You were constantly selling. You were constantly making sure that your guys were good, but the actual work was like once every 5 years. It's not like the NBA or even
really hands-on day in
or
day
even
out,
a celebrity where you're looking for movies or TV shows or whatever
opportunities,
new
weekly,
opportunities.
daily, right?
Exactly.
So he comes back, and now you're actually meeting. You're going through the process of meeting with agents. You're doing all this stuff.
Yep.
What's that like?
So I'm meeting all these agents. I'm talking to different people, asking questions, just trying to be curious and understand what do the different agents do. Let them pitch me. I had positioned myself at least as a friend gatekeeper to Brandon, And so it's funny how small the industry is. Very quickly,
They realize
I'm getting calls from
You're the guy.
They realize
yes.
I'm the guy.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm getting calls from all sorts of different people, and quickly took myself through a crash course of being pitched on what does an agent do.
So most people, right, would go through that process and say, hey, I helped my friend. Cool. We landed him in a situation where we feel great. He gets drafted, and the rest is really history. He's had an incredible career. He's still having an amazing career, right? He's won Super Bowl champion, all those things. You go and build kind of a business off of this somewhat, right? Talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so we go through this process, and this is the summer of my sophomore year, the summer of Brandon's junior year.
It's crazy that you're a sophomore in high school, in college, going through this process.
So I go through it, and I sit with Brandon, and I say, look, here's the top 5 agents in the NFL. It's Jimmy Sexton, it's Joel Siegel, it's Drew Rosenhaus, it's Priority Sports, and it's Athletes First. They're all good. You'll be fine if you go with any of them. I'm going to line up 3 meetings for you of the people I think are best. Does that make sense to you? And he's completely relying on me at this point, and his mom had put a lot of trust in me as well as his father. So his mom, Tasha, and his dad, Derek, they had relied on me to provide information to the whole family at this point. And now thinking back on it, it's kind of fucking crazy because I was 20. But I had put together enough research and memos together and all sorts of information where we felt like we were in a good place and we had the top guys. And look, it's easy when Brandon Graham is Brandon Graham,
right?
And he's going to be a top 15 pick in the NFL draft. So then I started thinking about who is going to take care of your money. And I had spent the summer in a finance internship. I really didn't enjoy it. I'm sitting behind a computer doing Excel spreadsheets. It's beginning of the crash or the recession in the late 2007 or 2008. The world's going to shit. Everybody thinks everything's going to be bad. And I'm working in a distressed debt firm, and we were buying a paint company, I think, if I remember correctly. And I said, this is just not for me. So I'm spending more and more time just not really caring about my internship because it just wasn't a priority to me to get a job. And I spent more time learning about what it means to build a business for yourself. And I started asking, what do wealthy individuals do to take care of their money? That simple.
Okay.
And so I started meeting with accountants and investment advisors and attorneys, estate specialists, just understanding how a wealthy individual sets themselves up. And I remember drawing a simple picture for Brandon 3 months later after that summer and saying, look, you need an accountant and an attorney, and those are the 2 most important people to start your career. Those are the people that are going to help you set a budget. Those are the people going to help you understand how to set up your family in terms of an estate plan. Those are the people that are going to help you rent or buy a home when you ultimately move into the market you get drafted to. And these are the foundational needs before you go invest your money. So that's what triggered or sparked my mind that the whole system's backwards. And most pro athletes hiring financial advisors is the wrong way to do it. But that title, financial advisor, makes you think if you're a young 19-year-old kid, whether you're an athlete or you're in business school, you think this is the person that's going to take care of my money.
My finances, yeah. He's going to take all my finances. And you don't know any better, right? You're 19, 20, you're like, hey, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Exactly. And so what I learned is that's really should be called an investment manager. And their titling and certifications qualify them to be financial advisors. But I started looking into a different model, which is, can Brandon hire a family office? And really what I learned a family office is just a vertically integrated financial services firm. It's accounting, it's tax, it's estate planning, it's insurance planning, it's all of the financial planning needs an individual and their family would want all in one house.
Got it.
And so I started researching firms that would do that for athletes. I remember reading an article that Troy Polamalu at the time was one of the only athletes that had a multi-family office, and he had made friends with a wealthy individual who kind of brought them into the fold and ultimately set up his vertically integrated financial services business. So that is the simplified version of what I ultimately showed Brandon. There was no one doing it, And
did he get it immediately? Like, yes, I get it. Check. Let's do that. Or
I think I drew a little picture. We put some skeletons all over the place, and BG said, I think, honestly, if you ask him, he would tell you he more trusted me than truly understood.
Got it.
And there was a level of trust in our relationship. He knew that all I wanted to do was take care of him and that I could help teach him and educate him on the process. So we kind of embarked my junior year, his senior year, onto the process of learning what he needed to do in terms of setting up a multifamily office for himself. And we understood that there was not a lot of multifamily offices marketed to athletes because most wealthy individuals either didn't have relationships with athletes or candidly thought they didn't have enough money to qualify to work with them.
Yeah, right.
And so that's what started the journey.
So how's that turn into, you do that, it works out for BG, you build a business out of it, and you get other athletes?
Yeah, so my junior year,
the fact that you're doing all this shit and you're still in college, by the way. Your junior year, I was like trying to like chase chicks and like eat pizza 4 times a day. Like I wasn't
exactly.
So
by the way, I'm living with a group of guys that, beyond the fact that I'm OCD, and our house was a shithole, and I feel like I was a maid, are being in college. And I said to myself, look, as you know, I like to have a good time. But I realized this is a very unique opportunity.
Yeah.
And I can build a multifamily office for Brandon and use Brandon as the building block to ultimately build a much larger company while taking care of him. And that was always the basis for this business, which was make sure that Brandon is good and make sure that he's taken care of.
So how do you end up getting, do you get other athletes? How do you end up getting other athletes?
So all of a sudden I become this guy at Michigan to the basketball and football team that everybody's coming to for financial advice.
Which, by the way, is not a bad place, not a bad school to be at where the football and the basketball team's coming at you.
Exactly.
Like, try that shit at Hofstra or something. Let me know how that works out for you. So,
exactly.
So the football and basketball team starts looking at you.
Starts looking at me for advice. So all of a sudden I'm on one hand pitching my dad on, I need a little bit of money to start up a business. Is this a good idea?
Uh-huh.
And him and a woman named Donnie Fall, who still takes care of me today, who is the CFO to my dad's former business, said, wow, this is a great idea. And we run businesses for a living. We can help you get started. On the other hand, I'm at Michigan pitching as if I know everything about managing money. And I've got Manny Harris, who I don't know if you remember played for the Cavs, and Deshaun Sims, who's now playing overseas, and Donovan Warren, who is ultimately drafted to the Jets, and Greg Matthews, and Brandon Miner, who bounced around from a number of different teams, and BG, all at Michigan, asking me for advice. So all of a sudden, I'm like, fuck, I've got about 8 clients, and I'm still in college. Wow. So I decided to incorporate and form the business January, so about after the first semester of my junior year, when Michigan had just finished the season. Brandon had just, ultimately finished his senior year at Michigan, had a fantastic year, was declaring for the draft. He went through the agent selection process, interviewed his final 3, and selected a guy named Joel Siegel, who's one of the top NFL agents. And that's how I embarked in building what was Compass Management.
So what I love about that story is, I think, and why I thought you'd be a perfect guest for this show is we have a lot of, young entrepreneurial people that listen and watch the show. And it was like, I think there's this generation now that feels like they have to have everything figured out, right? I got to have a business plan. I got to figure this out. I got to know what my 5-year plan is. I got to know how this is going to end and how we're going to pivot here and all these things. And I'm like, I come from the school of like, just start. And you're gonna fuck some shit up. You're going to make some mistakes and you'll pivot and you'll learn from that and you'll figure it out, but just start. And I always think through, it's like, there's the person that spends a year on the business plan, and there's a person that has already been in business for a year and learned along the way, and that person always figures shit out, right? So you build your business, you get it to a point where you can actually, you end up selling the actual business. What was that thought? How'd you get there?
So, there's 5.5 years in between starting the business and ultimately selling it. And I'll give you a little bit of the story and to comment on what you said, which is funny, is I never built a business plan. The business plan was build a family office for athletes and get more athletes. And it was funny because about 3 years later, this woman, Donnie, who now manages my family office and really takes care of me and all my business affairs, was like pushing me, you need a business plan. And
like, this is the business plan.
This is the business plan. We did it. And so ultimately throughout that process, there's a ton of learnings.
Of course.
At one point, we had brought in Joe Dumars and Mark Wahlberg as partners.
Wow.
Wanted to get guys who could ultimately teach me how to relate to an athlete or a celebrity, and really understand how to speak their language, because we were as much in the education business as we were in the financial services business, because it was all about teaching.
Yeah, well, it's like at that point, athletes understand an agent and they think they understand a financial advisor. Family office, to most people, they don't get that.
They don't get that.
Yeah.
And by the way, the term family office, I still think if you say it on, a street block in New York, people have no fucking clue what you're talking about.
Right.
It's still such a niche thing in the high net worth world in terms of service providers. So it was unique. And throughout the process of building Compass, we ultimately at one point looked, can we raise capital and start doing this for just wealthy individuals and not just athletes and entertainers? Mm-hmm. We had brought on a number of different clients, both in the NBA, NFL, MLB. We had brought on a band. We started spreading into music.
I love it.
And it was just a domino effect of people that I would meet. I had no website. It was just a client login. And I had no social media. And the reason that I still have no social media to this day is because I didn't want anyone to know how young I was. So
we're going to get into that too, by the way, in a second.
And so we go, we really believe, similar to Robot, that we were the people behind the stars, or behind the
work,
guy.
The work speaks for itself. The client speaks for itself. Yes,
exactly.
100%.
The people and the families and the client speaks for themselves. So we'll be behind, and it was word of mouth. And ultimately, after about 4 years, I decided this feels really good, and to look at where our clients were financially and the success that they were having was amazing. But I wanted to see what my next opportunity was. So I said, why don't I email Stephen Ross? And why don't I try and find an opportunity to talk to him and just get life advice or business advice? And the reason I thought of him is because I went to the Ross School of Business.
Yeah, so perfect transition. You're a pro at this, man. Perfect transition. Stephen Ross. So for anyone that's been under, a boulder, not even a rock, Stephen Ross, owner of the Miami Dolphins, maybe the most successful, if not, definitely one of the, if not the most successful, real estate developers. Hudson Yards is kind of his baby, right? I just had the honor of being on a panel at University of Michigan with Nate Forbes, Uncle Nate.
Uncle
Nate.
Nate.
Listening, what's up? Shout out to you. You can't be on the campus without seeing Steve Ross's name somewhere or everywhere. Let's just be clear.
It does feel like he owns Michigan.
Yes, to be clear. So this to me is one of the most intriguing things in your journey. It's you basically cold emailed Steve Ross?
Yeah. So the thinking behind it, and we'll get into this more because I think this actually contributes a lot to who I am, but I was very fortunate to have a lot of mentors and a lot of people helping me build Compass. In fact, I don't know if I truly appreciated the level of mentorship that I had and the level of guidance and support in terms of smart people around me until later in my career at Relevant, which I'll get into later. Mm-hmm. But I did know at the time that I had to keep learning, and that's been the foundation of my entire career, which is try and find really smart people, try to ask as many questions as possible. And it's like, when you get a calculator during a math test, if you can figure out how to get to the answers quicker, why wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. So I've always learned, why don't I go to industry specialists in different areas and learn from them? And Steve not only was in sports, was successful in real estate development, as you mentioned, owned Equinox and SoulCycle and had all these businesses. But it was his Miami Dolphins interest that intrigued me. And so I emailed sross@related.com, steve.ross@related.com. I think Steven.Ross. I think I emailed like 8 emails for Steve Ross.
So to say, you didn't even have his email.
Had no idea his email.
And I think that's such an interesting thing because I have people DM me all the time and people, comment on, the podcast show. And I'm like, hey, don't solicit business and don't give me, your resume over DM. Like, find the proper channels to reach out to me in and like shoot your shot there. And people are like, whoa, we don't have your email. I always think of you. I'm like, no. Like Danny literally sent every variation of Steve Ross an email until he got the right one. So you go and you're like, you know what? I'm going to shoot my shot. I'm going to send him this email.
But my shot was very simply, I went to Ross School of Business. This is the business Compass Management I had formed. These are a couple of the name athletes that I'm working with. You know, here's my partner, Joe Dumars. I just want to spend a half hour with you to pick your brain. And that's truly what I wanted. In fact, when I went to make I'll skip a step. Steve responds in 8 minutes. Wow. And so I get an email back, love to meet with you, and copies an assistant on it.
So hold that thought. To give people like context, how old is Steve?
Steve
75, 76.
Yeah, he's probably 75 at the time.
So let's just say 75, right? Round number. It's like that to me, and I'll get into like the story on like how you first introduced me to Stephen Ross. It's like at 75, he's still getting after it. Like he's still responding
That's an understatement.
to an email, right? He's still responding to an email within 8 minutes of a cold call email.
By the way, I have guilt of going on vacation next week because I know Steve is grinding.
That's an incredible thing. So like the fact that you send him an email, he doesn't necessarily know you from a can of paint, and he replies. What's he say to you in the email?
I think it's a very simple response. Love to meet with you, and he copies an assistant on it. I can probably find the figure it out.
Yep. Okay.
So I follow up to make sure that I'm getting the meeting. And it was a woman named Rosie, and I still remember this specifically, who's not with him anymore. So I set up the meeting. Steve, ultimately, in an attempt to blow me off, says, I'll meet you in Ann Arbor at 10:30 p.m. on X date.
10:30 p.m.
p.m.
Okay.
So I was, of course, elated that I got the meeting time. I'm ready to go. I put my suit on, and I start to put an agenda together, I think maybe the day before. And I started thinking in my head, I think maybe at this time I'm 23 or 24. I've got a business to talk about, but I don't even have anything to ask Steve. I think my only ask was, I just want to learn. Can you give me advice on what I should do? What do you think of my business? What do you think I should do with my career? Because to your point, and you brought this up earlier, the reason I got into my business is I had no clue what the fuck I wanted to do with my life. I knew what I didn't want to do, which is go in finance and sit and be a banker and behind a desk. And I had a happenstance opportunity take me into Compass Management, and I followed my passion. And so ultimately, there was nothing specific to ask Steve. I ultimately get to go meet him, and it's him and Jeff Blau, who is the CEO of Related Companies, also a Michigan alum. And we sit in the lobby of the Ross School of Business in Ann Arbor at 10:30.
Not intimidating at all, by the way. You're sitting in the lobby of his building.
Exactly. And I think the lights are half out at this point. And I can sense that I'm getting, Steve and Jeff on the way to go to bed after a late night, and they really don't want to be there. But ultimately, I think an hour and a half later, we're still talking. Steve had connected me to a guy named Nat Moore, who's still with the Dolphins, just to talk about what I was doing.
But not to cut you, I want to spend some time on, because it happens to me on a much smaller level. It's like people like, hey, I want to pick your brain, right? You have to do the hard work, right? You have to go and you got to make it easy for the person you're trying to spend time with and learn from. And you have to come prepared knowing the questions you want to ask. You have to come prepared to show them, hey, I've gotten this far, I've done this, I'm worthy of your time. And you have to be very clear on what you want to get out of it, right? So you didn't just sit there and be like, so Steve, tell me what made you successful.
Right.
Right? It was something specific to, hey, this is what I'm doing, this might be my business challenge, this is what I'm trying to figure out, can you help me?
Yeah, so what I came in with specifically, and I think I figured this out on the car ride there, was this is the business I built. I'm working with 30 plus athletes at this point, or 25 plus athletes at this point, and I think I'm ready for the next challenge. I don't know how to take this business to the next level. Is this, ultimately what I should leverage to get to the next step? Excuse me. Should I look into other businesses? I didn't know where I should go next, but I felt like at this point, I really understood the family office business. I really understood helping families manage their money, let alone athletes, because it really didn't matter whether we worked with an athlete or we worked with you. And so
I don't like that you said athletes and then me. Like, I'm not an athlete, but we'll talk about that off air. Go ahead, continue the story.
No, it's a compliment because you have a bank account we could have worked with. So I go in and I basically established what we had accomplished, and I established that I was at this inflection point of trying to figure out what's next. How do I leverage this business to take the next step? Do I raise money and go work with just high net worth individuals? Do I get into marketing for athletes? Should I also be an agent? I'm just asking him specific questions about if he were me, I had accomplished this based on his experience in sports, what did he think? And he had some specific feedback in that moment, which was, why don't you connect with the Dolphins, see if they think there's an opportunity for their players to utilize this service? And that was really the next step from that meeting.
Got it. So how do you get to the point where you end up selling your business and you end up working for Steve Ross? How do you get there?
So over the next 9 months, I had started showing up in New York and meeting with Steve probably, I don't know, we met maybe 6 or 7 times, probably 5 or 6 times at this point.
So when you say showing up, you're literally being persistent, like, hey, it's me again, Steve.
Hey, it's me again, I'm here. and hey, it's me again, I'd love to spend some time with you. And I'd connected with the Dolphins at this point. And Steve, after meeting with me a couple times, had said, look, I think you're a very talented individual, but I think this business is capped out, and I think you're going to be better utilized, or your skills will be better utilized doing something else. You should sell the business.
How'd you take that, right? Because I think a lot of times, especially young entrepreneurs, it's their baby, right? It's something you've spent all your life with and you really believe in. Did you take it like, hey, here's an extremely successful, businessman. He probably knows what the fuck he's talking about, and maybe I should look at it a little differently? Or were you like, maybe he doesn't know what he's talking about?
So to be honest with you, when I really think back on it, once he said that, because his voice had so much authority to me, and I was looked at him as such an inspirational figure and what he had accomplished, I immediately said, of course, my business is fucking stupid. And I went back to Detroit, and I told my dad and Donnie, I said, all right, I got to sell the business. And at this point, a fear set in of, okay, now what do I do next? Because I didn't even, and at this point, I had partially been at the place myself where I was looking for the next thing. So I think this was almost pushing me over the edge of understanding and hearing somebody else from the outside say that as well. But it was also a sense of nervousness of, okay, what do I do next?
So you end up selling the business. You end up working with Steve. What's your first role working with Steve?
So I joined RSE Ventures, and there's one interim period where there's a guy named Matt Higgins who runs RSE Ventures, and I'd built a great relationship with Matt. But also between trying to impress Steve, I spent the next 6 months trying to impress Matt while simultaneously doing an auction for my business with a couple investment advisory and accounting firms that had looked at buying it. And I was selling Matt on why I was a good addition to his team. And I joined ultimately in a business development M&A role, probably 6 months later. So throughout a year process, I had sold the business and joined in an M&A business development role at RSE, was working directly for Matt Higgins, and then ultimately Steve. And RSE Ventures, where I joined, was a sports and entertainment investment company.
So you take this role, and this is an important one. It's like, I think, to my earlier point of young entrepreneurs wanting to have it all figured out, right? Like, if I take this role, that means I'll do this for 18 months, and then I'll do this, and then if I do this, that means I'll be ready to do that. When you take this role, do you know what the following step is for you? Do you know what you want it to be? Like, what are you thinking when you take this role?
No idea. What I knew was that if I was around Matt and Steve, that I assumed good things would happen and I would continue learning. Ultimately, I was fortunate enough to sell the business and to get what for me was a big check at the time from a group called FFO that bought the business, which was a larger family office business. But there is one step, which is I, within a month, had moved from 2 places in Los Angeles and Detroit to New York. So closed up 2 places that I lived and moved to New York without even thinking about it because I knew that I would figure it out as I went along.
But you're all in. You're head first. I'm in. I'm moving.
I'm in.
So now I'm going to fast forward to when you and I meet. We're actually in this, where the studio is, in the office where the studio is, and my business partner and best friend, Maverick Carter, he happens to be in New York in our New York office, and there's tons of people come in. I mean, if you've been fortunate enough to spend any time in our office, Colin Kaepernick can be here one day, LeBron can be here the next day, the CEO of this company, you know, so it's no shocker when people are in here. And everyone's just running around, just handling whatever their business is. So I'm in here running from one meeting to the next, and I see you come into his office. And you come into his office, you have a suit on, and, you know, you do your thing, and I see you leave an hour and a half later, whatever. So I ask Mav, as I normally do when there's someone in the office I don't recognize, I'm like, hey, who's that guy you met with? He's like, oh, it's this guy. His name's Danny. He's cold emailed me. He cold called me. He sent me an email, and he said he wanted to spend some time, and you know, and I gave him some time, and I said, okay, like, is he good? He goes, I think he's gonna be fucking commissioner of the NFL one day or whatever else he wants to do. I think he's that good. And I was like, oh, all right. And I go about my business, right? Talk to me about why you reached out to Mav and just this overall. I think people this day and age have like this fear of like either reaching out to people they don't know unless they have guaranteed success, or knowing the proper way to do it, right? You were already successful in your own right. You had sold a business. You have a successful career with Stephen Ross and Matt Higgins, and you're doing your thing there. Why reach out to Mav? Like, what's your thinking on Mav specifically? And a step further, just your thinking as a whole on like cold calling people. I'm just like super intrigued by that.
So Mav specifically is I had watched when I grew up in Detroit area through some friends that were actually families that had minority investments and controlling interest in the Cavaliers. When LeBron got drafted, these guys had just bought the Cavaliers. It was Dan Gilbert and Nate Forbes.
Uncle Nate,
who's like not only a mentor but family to me. Mm-hmm. And I remember watching Mav and Rich and Randy and the whole group when LeBron had been drafted. They came to Detroit for meetings, mm-hmm. and I was just intrigued, you know, speeding the process up, what they had been able to accomplish with LeBron, but specifically watching how Mav had transitioned from the athlete management world into brand marketing, into investing, creating a family office, selling half of the marketing firm to Fenway Sports Group, building a media company with Uninterrupted at this point. Mm-hmm. Maul was here actually in the office. Yep. He had just been leaving Pepsi.
Shout out to Jamal. Yep.
Shout out to Jamal. They were, you know, at this point they're, you know, building a film and television company. So I had just watched such to me, an inspiring level of success, but an ability to transition from one career in athlete management, which is completely different than media, which is different than film and television, which is different than brand marketing, which you were doing.
Yep.
And so I had watched you guys build Robot from the sidelines and just been a fan. So I had asked, you know, to answer your question directly, how do you feel about cold emailing? Well, my perspective is, one, if somebody doesn't respond, I'm in the same place I would be before I sent the email. So I've introduced myself to people, you know, ultimately that have become close friends all across the board. I'll talk about, you know, a guy like Peter Guber later that I had Dre introduce me to. So I always try and find a common ground, which is with Mav, I'd found one or two people that at least I could name drop them or, you know, provide them as references. So if he texted or called somebody and said, hey, do you know this guy?
It can help validate, hey, he's a real guy.
Validate that I'm not, you know,
not
just
some schmo.
Yeah, exactly.
I want some free LeBron 16s.
Exactly.
Yep.
And I just tried to put a quick note together that would get me in the door. But from my perspective, it was what Mav had done transitioning so many different careers. And it was simply, if he doesn't respond or doesn't want to meet me, I'm in the same place I was yesterday.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned someone who's become, you know, close to my heart and a very good friend, a very large little brother, Draymond Green. How'd you and Dre meet?
So when I had Compass, my partner, Joe Dumars, his son, Jordan Dumars, worked in the business with me.
Okay. And
Jordan was like brothers with Dre. They grew up playing AAU basketball together with the family in Detroit. Jordan had really looked out for Dre when he was growing up in terms of basketball and some other things, obviously, along with Mary and Dre's family and, you know, and how important his mom is in his life. But I know Jordan was an important friend and Joe was an important mentor and friend as well. I had met Dre when I was at Michigan still, just starting Compass. He was at Michigan State. and we built a great relationship. And it was funny because I never actually pitched him on Compass. And if you know Dre, you know he's very stubborn. So you don't sell Dre.
No, not Draymond Green. Stubborn. No way.
So I never sold Dre, and I don't know if he would remember this, but I bet you he could tell the same exact story, which was, I saw him a couple times in his rookie year, just when I had been out in the LA area for work and was going out to the West Coast. I would pop up to San Francisco and we'd hang out, and we wouldn't talk about business at all. Ultimately, I think it was the playoffs, his first year, he reached out and was worried about like insurance on his house or his car, or had said something along the lines of, I'm in the middle of the playoffs, I'm on the bench, and I'm thinking about whether my shit is insured or not. And that's Dre's way of saying, okay, I need you. And so he had a financial advisor at this point, but no fucking money to invest, like I told him. And realized what he needed was a real family office. And so ultimately, that built our business relationship, but we were friends, years prior to that, and had built a nice relationship through Joe and Jordan Dumars, and had become pretty close. But we got very close through working together as well, and built our friendship through that.
It's like typical Dre. Like Dre wouldn't give you the satisfaction of saying he needs you or your business expertise. It would be something along the lines of like, hey, I mean, if you like wanted to, we could probably work together. Or whatever.
Exactly.
Like, he's not going to ask for your help.
He probably made me beg.
What is your capacity? What is your relationship with Dre today from a business standpoint? Obviously, you guys are like brothers and close, and
yeah,
I've seen you guys together. And I always depends what day I see you guys. I can't tell who's the big brother and the little brother. It just varies on whatever mood you guys are in. But from a business standpoint, what's your relationship with Draymond Green today?
So I still oversee all of Dre's business. I act in a very similar role to what Mav does for LeBron. I think that's a very simple way to put it. I'd consider him a business partner. I'm an advisor to him. And I also learn from him. I mean, which is one important thing that I think is worth talking about, after Dre specifically, is making the transitions I have in my career have actually helped me to understand you always have to be learning. Mm-hmm. And Mav is the epitome of that. Absolutely. In terms of his curiosity. But overseeing Dre's business, we're partners in everything we do. We actually set up holding companies for our investments, in which we have given each other stakes in each other's holding companies, so our investments are aligned, and we're partners in everything we do.
Love it. So before we get out of here, obviously your current job, right? It's you're CEO of Relevant Sports. I mean, I want to say when you and I met, you were still at RSE.
Yeah, still
right?
at RSE.
You're still at RSE, and we worked on this little thing together called El Clasico.
Yeah.
And you call me one day, and you're like, "Hey, so a little bit of news." And I'm like, "What's up?" And you're like, I'm about to become CEO of Relevant Sports. Were you 30 at CEO of Relevant Sports? 29?
No, I was 28 at that point.
So 28, and again, we'll kind of end it on the age thing because you referenced it before. You're 28, you become CEO of Relevant Sports. What's that like? Is Steve calling? Like, how'd you find this news out that you were being promoted to be CEO of Relevant Sports?
So it initially started on a trip that me and you took together with Steve and Mav and Future and Charlie Stilitano, who had started Relevant.
Incredible trip, by the way.
To El Clasico.
In Madrid.
It was April of 2017 in Madrid.
Yep.
And we had a phenomenal trip, as you know.
Yes.
And it was on the plane back that we had started working on El Clasico, and I was lucky enough to have you and the robot team really as a partner throughout the entire process. And through the success that El Clasico was having, Charlie and Steve started talking about bringing me on as CEO at that point. I think it was April, maybe May at that point. The two of them and Matt Higgins, who's at RSE, as I wanted to look for a full-time operating role, they were moving on from a CEO they had. Charlie had founded the business with Matt and Steve, and they thought that I was best suited to ultimately take over. But it was really the success that we were having in El Clasico, and I was fortunate to have Robot and all the other great partners that helped put on that specific event that ultimately drove them to say this is the right person to carry the business forward with Charlie.
I think one of the dopest things in your journey and a common theme in your journey is you haven't necessarily known what the end game is necessarily, right? It's like you've had faith in the partners you've had. you've crushed whatever's been in front of you, right? Whether it was Compass, whether it was RSE, now this. Speak a little bit to like your mindset of having faith in the process, but also, what's the word I'm looking for? Also, just being open to like the opportunities that come to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's having faith in people. And the same way that I quickly trusted you and Robot, in the way that you guys quickly trusted me when you didn't know who the fuck I was, I was fortunate to have great people who led me to bigger opportunities. So I've always looked at things in my life about who I'm doing it with, more so than specifically what I'm doing. And maybe that's the wrong way. I don't know. We'll see. But so far, I've been fortunate that business is all about the people that are involved, who's driving the business, how they're building it, and it's been a people thing. And I haven't looked past who I'm getting into business with. Obviously, you need to understand what the opportunity is, and you need to do a little bit of market research on what industry or what specific thing you're doing.
Yeah, of course.
But I didn't know shit about global football. I think I played soccer when I was 5 years old and didn't get past the oranges from the moms. And I'd never watched a soccer match in my life. Mm-hmm. The first one I ever been to was El Clasico in Madrid with you guys.
You and I both. Yeah.
So to me, it was I knew it was the biggest sport in the world. I knew it was a massive opportunity. I knew there was substantial capital behind it, but it was all about the people.
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things that makes you fucking brilliant and uber successful is what you don't know and you're trusting people, right? I think I can name, if we had the time, 100 times when you're like, hey, what do you think I should do here, right? Or I've seen you ask other people for advice in it. When you're in a position where you're like, I'm CEO, I can say what we're going to do and that's what we're going to do and everyone will get in line. That's never been your style. Your style has always been one of, hey, you're more experienced, so this is more your expertise. Give me some advice or a point of view on what we should do here. Where's that come from for you throughout your career?
Well, it's interesting. It started initially at Compass and then at RSE of truly appreciating that I had to rely on people with greater expertise than me and had to lean on those people and trust those people to guide me through it because I truly didn't have the capabilities. I knew at Compass that I could put the right people in the room to ultimately guide our athletes that had experience and expertise in accounting and tax and estate planning and all the different services we provided. And I would be the one to bring in the clients and educate the clients almost as like a interpreter from the accountants and tax specialists and other financial professionals to the actual families of the athletes that we were working with. One thing I've really learned, which is important though, in terms of curiosity is, and I've said this before, I had success with Compass coming out of college. I'm 20 when I started it. Ultimately, we sell the business. I'm mid-20s. Then I go to RSE. We make some investments that do really well. And I'm doing really well with Matt Higgins and Steve Ross and having success. And so I came into Relevant when they had appointed me the CEO. I thought I was great. Mm-hmm. And what I realized now looking back is I stopped learning. Meaning I thought that I had this. I thought I got this. I'll figure it out, and I know how to manage people, and I know how to do this. But ultimately, I'm managing, $150 million P&L. I'm managing, at this point, taking the business from just a core international soccer tournament to youth, women's, marketing businesses. We had 75 people, and I made a lot of mistakes. Hiring, process-oriented, focusing on the wrong things. And what I realized was I stopped learning. I stopped asking questions. And so I can tell you now, I don't know if truly along the way I understood the responsibility I had as a CEO in terms of putting the right people in place, learning from them. I always knew it was important to learn, but I've put even more of an emphasis on that now and in giving advice to anybody I guess I'm fortunate to be in this position. I would say that I've learned a ton over the last few years in terms of doubling down on that. I think that what I'm good at is putting teams in place, inspiring those people, providing them the resources to be successful, but never being the expert in any of the specific areas and relying on and trusting smart people to guide me through that process. And I think you can't stop asking questions. You can't stop learning. I mean, you and your partner, Mav, remain more curious than anybody I've met. And I'm fortunate to have you guys, but, also a number of mentors that do that for me.
There's a word you've said that we say on off the air to each other via text, and we live, is curious and curiosity. Speak a little bit about that.
To me, that's, really humbling yourself that you don't have all the answers, and finding a few mentors or a few people that you can rely on that, it's more than mentorship, that are friends that you can call on. They may become partners, and it may have a business transaction component to it down the road, but that are true relationships that you can rely on as guides. Because to me, if you stop learning and you stop asking questions, that means you're no longer innovating. And I think if you look at any successful CEO, I read a lot, from Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos and some of these amazing companies like Apple and Amazon. Those guys never think they're the smartest person in the room. Mm-hmm. And Steve Ross would say this with Related, that he's fortunate to have Jeff Blau and Harvey Spivak with Equinox and Bruce Beal at Related and Tom Garfinkel at the Dolphins and Matt Higgins and all these guys to lead him in different areas that have different expertise, and he puts them all together. Obviously, he's unique in his ability to have an unbelievable vision. But for me, I've seen so many people continue to ask questions. I think Uncle Nate is one of the most curious people I've ever met.
Absolutely.
And he's one of the more successful people I've ever met.
Absolutely.
So I'm fortunate, like you, that we've seen a lot of people that have had success that still have the humility to understand that they don't know everything. And I try and use that as a block to ground me to keep asking questions.
No, I think it's spot on what you say. And Mav has taught me. Mav's younger than me. Mav has taught me, as my partner and friend, mentors come in all forms and shapes, right? It's like you can have mentors that are older than you, mentors that are younger than you. My VP, Chelsea. I learn from Chelsea daily. Mentors, I think there's this like delusion of like mentors should be older and wise and all that. You can learn from people that have failed. Right. Mentors come in all shapes. To that extent, before I get you out of here, I want to ask you one last question. For that 19-year-old kid that's in a dorm in Michigan right now listening to this, or at some other school, or not even in school, and is trying to figure out, they want to get their business off the ground, and they have this vision of, I don't care if they want to go and, have a T-shirt company, or they want to go and start a management company. What advice can you give that 19, 20-year-old kid that's trying to figure it out and trying to get their start?
Two things. Stay curious, ask questions, and take risks. Because if you don't take risks, whether it's cold calling or trying that T-shirt company or whatever you're going to do, you're in the same fucking place that you were when you started. Mm-hmm. We didn't even get to the fact that I tried to start a streetwear brand with Big Sean as my motto when I was 16 years old. And I'll show you. It was called Purple Gang Clothing, one of the worst clothing companies to ever be created. And so throughout my life, it's continue to take risks, because if you're gonna just go status quo and take one step at a time, you're never gonna be able to. It's like, can you win a lot at a casino if you don't really bet? And so my perspective is to that 19-year-old kid: ask questions, find good mentors, don't stop learning, and take some risk.
I love it, Danny Sillman, CEO of Relevant Sports. More importantly, my friend, we got to get you out of here. You have a flight to catch to Europe, and we'll start our vacation in a couple days. Actually, when this comes out, we'll be on a boat somewhere in France. So
good. So I hope I can still understand myself.
Thanks for coming out, brother. Appreciate you. Danny Sillman, people. Peace.